Today we're going to learn about the quadratic formula. Now the quadratic formula can be used to solve any quadratic equation. So this means that you don't run into the issues that you do with factoring, where sometimes the quadratic equation is not factorable, or you don't have graph paper handy where you're going to graph and then easily be able to read the x-intercepts off of the graph. So remember that when we are solving a quadratic equation, that really what we're doing is we are looking to find those x-intercepts. So the quadratic formula is x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all of that divided by 2 times a. Now the a, the b, and the c all correspond to either coefficients or constants when we have our quadratic equation in standard form. And remember, standard form is y is equal to ax squared plus bx plus c. And when we're solving for x, so we're solving our equation, we are setting y equal to 0. So our first example is to solve y is equal to x squared minus 2x minus 15. So we're going to start off by writing down our formula. This is how we're going to memorize it, by writing it down over and over again. So x is equal to negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all over 2a. So next we want to actually identify a, b, and c from our equation. So a is a positive 1, right? Because there's a little silent positive 1 there. B is negative 2, and C is negative 15. So all we're going to do is we're going to plug those into our formula. So make sure your square root sign extends all the way over, not just halfway over the parts that you're writing down. Notice that my negative 2 for b is in brackets here and then here, so that when, especially here, when we square it, it becomes a positive 4 and doesn't stay as a negative 4. Okay, so now we're going to get to a simplifying. So negative or minus negative 2, that's going to give us positive 2 plus or minus square root of positive 4, and here we have negative 4 times 1 times negative 15. That gives us positive 60, and all of this is divided by 2. So we're just going to continue simplifying. Okay, we're going to go up here so we don't move off the page, and x is equal to 2 plus or minus 8. Right, because the square root of 64 is going to give us positive 8, and all that is divided by 2. Now there's going to be two possibilities here. So we have the possibility that x is 2 plus 8, all divided by 2, and we're just going to complete that. So that's going to give us 10 over 2, and that gives us 5. Now this is where we were using the plus. Right, now we are going to be using the minus. So let's look at our other answer for x. So x is equal to 2 minus 8 over 2, which is negative 6 over 2, which gives us negative 3. So our other x is negative 3. So what we found here are two real solutions, and that means that there's two x-intercepts. So let's conclude with that. Therefore, there are two real solutions, and those are 5 and negative, let's add a d to the word and, negative 3. Let's move on to our second example using the quadratic formula. And you'll notice that I've written the quadratic equation in a bit of a different form this time. Instead of y equals, I've set it equal to 0. We're going to be solving 9 times x to the power of 2 plus 30x plus 25 is equal to 0. So again, we're going to start off by writing our quadratic formula. X is equal to negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. Let's identify a, b, and c. So a is 9, b is 30, and c is 25. And now we're just going to put in all of our numbers. So we have x is going to be equal to negative 30 plus or minus the square root of 30 squared minus 4 times 9 times 25. All of that is over 2 times 9. And we're just going to continue simplifying here. So 30 squared gives us 900, and 4 times 9 times 25 also gives us 900. So obviously the bigger numbers you can use in your calculator, or if there are decimals or fractions, you can always just put those into your calculator. And 900 minus 900 gives us 0, of course. So we end up with negative 30 plus or minus square root of 0 over 18. Now, you can take the square root of 0, and it's just going to be 0. So what we end up with is x is equal to negative 30 over 18. Okay, so notice here there's only going to be one solution. Now we have a fraction here, and this is one that's fairly easy to reduce. So we want to state our answer as a reduced fraction whenever possible. Right, so we can just divide the top and bottom numbers by 6, and we end up with x is equal to negative 5 over 3. And so we're just going to leave it as that. And then we want to end with the therefore statement. So therefore, there is one real solution. Here's our last example using the quadratic formula. We're going to solve y is equal to 0.5 times x squared minus x plus 6. So we'll start out by identifying a, b, and c. So a is equal to 0.5, b is equal to negative 1, and c is equal to positive 6. Next, we'll write out our formula. X is equal to negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. And now we're just going to plug in our numbers. We have negative minus 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 1 squared minus 4 times 0.5 times positive 6. And all of that is divided by 2 times 0.5. Okay, so let's start simplifying. So negative minus 1 gives us positive 1 plus or minus the square root of positive 1, because negative 1 squared is positive 1. Remember to put the brackets there. And then we have negative 4 times 0.5 times 6. So that's going to give us negative 12. And all of that is going to be over 1, right? 2 times 0.5 gives us 1. So let's simplify one step further. We have 1 plus or minus square root of negative 11. And it's all over 1, so we don't need to write that again. Now, here we have a negative number. We can't take the square root of a negative number and get an answer that is a real number. This goes into the world of imaginary numbers, which we don't deal with in grade 10. So at this point, you're going to notice that this is not a real number. Okay, and we have discussed this in previous lessons. Okay, can't have a negative under a square root. right? Because then that gives us imaginary numbers. So we don't need to do anything further with this other than state that there are no real solutions, which means that there's no x-intercepts. Okay, and recall this sort of graph will look something like this. Okay, so it's not crossing the x-axis. Example 4 of solving equations using the quadratic formula. So in this example, we have an equation that is not yet in standard form, so we need to put this into standard form, and we're going to do that by expanding and simplifying, and then everything's going to go to the left-hand side, and we're going to set that equal to 0. So to expand, we get 4x squared minus 12x plus 2x minus 6, and that is equal to 5x minus 1. Okay, we're going to add those two terms together here. 4x squared minus 10x minus 6 is equal to 5x minus 1. We're going to bring over the 5x minus 1 and set that equal to 0. And lastly, we are going to collect our like terms. So we end up with 4x squared minus 15x minus 5, and that is equal to 0. So now we're going to solve for x using the quadratic formula. We're going to start off by writing out the quadratic formula. X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. And all of that divided by 2 times a. So our b term is negative 15. So we have minus negative 15 plus or minus the square root of negative 15 squared minus 4 times a, which is 4, times c, which is negative 5. And all of this divided by 2 times 4. Okay, so we're going to simplify here. That's going to give us positive 15 plus or minus the square root of 225 plus 80 all over 8. Oops, not 80. And that's equal to 15 plus or minus the square root of 305 divided by 8. So here we're going to have two possible answers. So we're going to look at x1, so the first one, where we do 15 plus the square root of 305, all divided by 8. And the second one, where we do 15 minus the square root of 305, all over 8. Now, here's the point where you're going to plug it into your calculator, and you're going to get a decimal. So you're going to round to 1 decimal place. So here we're going to get an answer of approximately 4.1, and here for our second one we're going to get an answer of approximately negative 0.3. Okay, so these here are our solutions. And we always want to round to 1 decimal place unless we're told otherwise.